This is The Space Shot, episode 276 for February 14th, 2018. Near Shoemaker, Voyager 1, Solar Max, and Sky-Brasil 1. I'm John Molnix, and happy Valentine's Day. The Near Shoemaker spacecraft performed an orbital insertion burn that placed it into orbit around Eros on February 14th, 2000. The Near in Near Shoemaker stands for Near-Earth Asteroid Rendezvous and is named in part after Gene Shoemaker, the co-discoverer of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. Shoemaker was a geologist and astronomer who died in a car crash in 1997. His legacy of discovery lived on in the Near Shoemaker spacecraft, as it continued to explore Eros from orbit from 2000 until 2001. In February of 2001, the spacecraft touched down on the surface of Eros, the first time that a spacecraft had accomplished this feat. Let's go back a decade for the next piece of history. On February 14th, 1990, the Voyager 1 spacecraft took the famous family portrait of the solar system as it rose ever higher above the ecliptic. The spacecraft's unique vantage point above the ecliptic, or orbital plane of the planets in our solar system, meant that Voyager 1 was in a position to capture one of the most striking images of our home. Earth appears as nothing more than a pale blue dot, set against the vast darkness of space. Carl Sagan had pushed for these images to be taken, and I'm going to be sharing a Planetary Society post on this piece of history. So be sure to check the show notes for that link. On or in orbit of our little blue dot lives everyone we've ever known. I've talked about Voyager 1 in the past, in episodes 104 and 182, among other ones. While looking back at the previous episodes that I've discussed Voyager, I stumbled across episode 183. I had forgotten how much I liked that episode, so download it again and give it a listen. This may not come as a shock to everyone that listens to this podcast, but one of my favorite movies is The Dream is Alive. As a kid, it was one of my favorites, and I still make a point of watching it once a year, just because it's awesome. In this documentary, astronauts are working on repairing the Solar Max satellite, which had been experiencing problems with its attitude control. Attitude control refers to how the spacecraft orients itself in space. Although with a malfunctioning spacecraft, it could easily be said that it's got a bad attitude since it wasn't working properly. Solar Max was launched on February 14th, 1980, and later that year is when it began to experience issues with its attitude control. 4 years after launch, Solar Max was repaired by the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger, which was filmed for The Dream is Alive, and this allowed the spacecraft to stay in orbit, performing science for years after the repair mission. Full disclosure for this next bit of history, I work for AT&T, and this podcast in no way reflects the views of AT&T or any of its subsidiaries, nor have I been compensated in any way for mentioning this launch. With that out of the way, the last bit of history is obviously a commercial launch. On February 14th, 2016, an Ariane 5 launched the Sky-Brasil 1 and Telcom 3S satellites. The Sky-Brasil 1 satellite is the 10th satellite that was launched by Arianespace for AT&T and DirecTV. It's interesting to note that 54 years passed between the launch of AT&T's first satellite, Telstar, and Sky-Brasil 1. These two satellites have radically different capabilities. Telstar was extremely primitive, but advanced by the day's standards. It was small and orbited Earth in such a way that ground stations had to move to continuously track the satellite. Sky-Brasil 1 and other satellites in a geostationary orbits are at a fixed point in the sky, which allows homes to have a fixed satellite dish that receives signals from the fleet of orbiting satellites. The differences in capabilities between early communications satellites and their modern descendants are striking. Telstar could send fax data, low-resolution video, and phone calls. New satellites like Sky-Brasil 1 deliver hundreds of channels of video, plus high-definition content. Now, in a bit of related news, SpaceX is scheduled to launch the first 2 of its Starlink satellites that will be the demonstrators for the proposed space-based internet that the company is going to be deploying. The launch of the first 2 Starlink satellites is slated for February 17th, and it will be the 4th SpaceX launch this year. I would really appreciate it if you could venture into the Apple Podcasts app or your podcast app of choice and leave a review for the Space Shot. To those of you that have already left reviews, thank you. For everyone else, reviews are critical because a steady stream of reviews helps ensure that the Space Shot stays higher up in the Apple Podcasts search algorithm. As always, the show notes have more information on today's episode. You can hit me up on Instagram and Twitter. Find me at John Molnix. I'm always up to chat. You can also connect with me on Facebook. Just search The Space Shot or click the links in the show notes. Tomorrow, Galileo. I'm John Molnix, and I'll catch you on the flip side.